You're standing in triple canopy jungle near the Ho Chi Minh Trail, 1968. The air is soup thick, wet, buzzing with insects that sound like they're discussing whether your blood type is worth the effort. Your squad's been patrolling for 6 hours. Every man is exhausted, dehydrated, thinking about anything except where his next step lands. The point man, 22 years old, 3 months in country, puts his boot down on what looks like solid ground covered in rotting leaves. There's a sound, not loud, a creak, like old furniture settling. Then the earth opens beneath him. He drops 4 feet onto sharpened bamboo stakes that punch through his jungle boots, through the flesh of his feet, up into his calves and thighs. The screaming starts immediately. It's not the scream of surprise, it's the scream of someone whose nervous system just received a damage report it can't process. His squad rushes forward to help. Because that's what you do, that's the training, that's the instinct. 2 men grab his arms to pull him up. That's when the secondary trap triggers. A bent sapling whips forward from the tree line, launching a bamboo spear at chest height. It catches 1 man in the ribs, penetrating 6 inches, collapsing his lung. The 3rd man, reaching for his radio to call for a medevac, steps on a tripwire. The captured M26 grenade rigged to a stake detonates with a flat crack that's more felt than heard, shrapnel sleeting outward in a 15-foot radius. 90 seconds after the first man stepped wrong, 3 soldiers are dead, 2 are bleeding out, and the squad is combat ineffective.
Total cost to construct all these traps?
$0. Materials, bamboo, vines. 1 captured grenade. Jungle debris, cut to 70 miles outside Bozeman, Montana, present day. A man stands on his own property, 40 acres, paid for, deed in his name. He's put up signs, no trespassing, private property, keep out. He's read the news. He's watched the cities. He knows what's coming, or thinks he does. So he's built defenses, punji stakes in the drainage ditches, whip traps along the tree line approach. It's his land. It's his family. He's not waiting for someone to kick in his door before he acts. One night, someone triggers a trap. Doesn't matter who. Lost hiker, drunk neighbor, doesn't matter. Broken leg, lacerations. The sheriff arrives at dawn. The man is arrested on his own property in front of his children. Aggravated assault, setting a man trap, a felony in 48 states. Reckless endangerment, criminal negligence. The victim sues, wins, takes the property. The man gets 15 years in a federal prison. His family loses everything for doing what armies have done for 3,000 years. That's the paradox we're walking into. The traps we're about to discuss are tactically brilliant. They're force multipliers. They've been standard military doctrine for centuries. They're taught in ranger school, in SARE training, in special forces survival courses.
They work. They've saved lives in war.
And if you build them on your own land to defend your own family, you are committing a felony. You will go to prison. The line between historical military ingenuity and illegal mantrap is razor thin, and it's drawn in statute, in case law, in the difference between a soldier following orders in a combat zone and a civilian acting without the legal framework of declared war. This video explores 5 trap systems that saved soldiers, that changed the outcome of battles, that are also absolutely unambiguously illegal for you to construct. We're going to build them, test them, show you the physics, the history, the mechanics of why they work, and we're going to show you the legal framework that will destroy your life if you deploy them. This is educational. This is historical. This is not instruction. Do not build these. Do not deploy these. If society collapses and the legal system ceases to exist, well, that's a different conversation. But right now, today, with laws in force and courts operational, this knowledge is so you understand the consequences, not so you go to prison. Let's start with the trap that's older than written language. Tastric Trap 1, the Punji Pit, bamboo sharpened to a needle point, a hole in the ground, a thin mat of sticks and leaves. That's it. That's the weapon that's been killing soldiers for at least 4,000 years. The Punji Pit originated in Southeast Asia as a hunting tool set for tigers, for wild boar, for anything large enough that falling onto sharpened stakes would immobilize or kill it. Hunters adapted it. Warriors adopted it. By the time the Vietnam War rolled around, the Viet Cong and NVA had refined punji traps into a science. Pits, whip traps, stake beds hidden in streams. The statistics don't tell the full story. Punji traps caused maybe 2 to 3% of US casualties during the war. Doesn't sound like much. But the psychological impact was exponentially higher. Every step became a conscious risk. Patrols slowed to a crawl. Soldiers stopped trusting the ground. Medics spent hours treating wounds that should have been minor, punctures, lacerations, but became infected with bacteria, introduced deep into tissue by steaks smeared with human feces, rotten fish, anything that would cultivate tetanus, staph, strep. Men lost legs to infections that started with a puncture wound through the boot. Morale collapsed. It wasn't the fear of firefights. It was the fear of the invisible, the passive, the trap that didn't care if you were a trained infantryman or a clerk who got lost on the way to the latrine. Here's how you build one, historically speaking. You dig a pit, 3 to 4 feet deep, 2 to 3 feet wide, just wider than a human stride. You sharpen bamboo stakes to needle points. Bamboo is stronger than most people realize. Some species have tensile strength comparable to steel. You fire harden the tips by charring them over a flame, which also sterilizes the surface, though that's irrelevant if you're smearing it with filth afterward. You embed the stakes at the bottom of the pit, angled slightly toward the center so that when a foot lands and starts to withdraw, the stakes guide it deeper instead of releasing it. Then you camouflage. A thin mat of small sticks laid across the pit, covered with leaves, dirt, whatever matches the surrounding terrain. The mat has to support light weight, a rabbit, a bird, so it doesn't look disturbed, but it has to collapse under human weight. That's the engineering. Simple, effective, deadly. We test this with a ballistic gel leg analog. It's not perfect, but it approximates the density of human muscle and bone. We drop 150 pounds onto the camouflaged pit. The mat collapses. The gel leg impacts the stakes. Penetration depth, 6 to 9 inches, depending on the angle and the quality of the bamboo. In a real scenario, that's through the boot sole, through the foot, sometimes into the calf or thigh, depending on how the victim falls. Extraction is agony. The stakes are barbed, or angled, or both. Pulling straight up causes more tissue damage than the initial penetration. You have to cut the stakes, or you risk tearing arteries, severing tendons, shattering bones that are already fractured. And if the stakes were contaminated, historically they were, you've just introduced Clostridium tetani, staph, strep, or any number of pathogens directly into deep tissue. In a field environment, pre-antibiotic or with limited medical resources, that puncture wound becomes sepsis. Gangrene, osteomyelitis, which is bone infection. Vietnam War medics reported punji wounds that looked survivable, turning into amputations or deaths within days because the infection moved faster than the antibiotics. Now here's why you'll go to prison if you build this. Man-trap statutes. Nearly every U.S. state has laws specifically criminalizing concealed devices designed to harm trespassers without human intervention. The legal precedent is Catco versus Briney, 1971. A farmer in Iowa got tired of people breaking into an abandoned farmhouse on his property. He rigged a shotgun to a tripwire. A burglar entered. The shotgun fired. The burglar survived, sued, and won. The court's reasoning was unambiguous. The law has always placed a higher value on human safety than on mere rights in property. You cannot use deadly force to protect property unless there is an imminent threat to human life. A trap doesn't assess threat. A trap doesn't distinguish between an armed home invader and a lost child. A trap triggers indiscriminately, which means you are legally responsible for every injury it causes regardless of the victim's intent, even on your own property, even with no trespassing signs posted, even if the person triggering the trap is a burglar. The criminal charges are aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, criminal negligence. The penalties are 5 to 20 years in prison, depending on severity and state. The civil liability is unlimited. The victim, even if they were trespassing, even if they were committing a crime, can sue you and they will win. They will take your property, your savings, everything you have, and you'll still go to prison. But let's say law and order have collapsed. Let's say there are no courts, no police, no system to prosecute you. Does that make Punji Pits tactically viable? Tactically, yes. Morally, no. They're silent, they're passive. They require zero energy once set. They delay attackers, demoralize them, force them to slow down, or avoid entire areas. That's effective area denial. But they're also indiscriminate. They harm anyone. Your own family members if they forget where the traps are. Refugees fleeing violence. Lost children. If even one innocent person is maimed or killed by your trap, you bear the moral weight of that. And if law enforcement ever returns, and history shows it usually does, even after disasters, you'll be prosecuted retroactively. The traps will be evidence. The injuries will be documented. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison for what you thought was survival. The alternative is active defense, armed patrols, guard dogs, alarm systems that trigger noise and light, not weapons. Defensive barriers like fences and ditches that slow attackers without killing them. Those are legal. Those allow human judgment. Those let you stop if the threat stops. Punji pits don't stop. They don't care. And that's why they're felonies. Asterisk tap 2, the whip trap. Take a young tree, bend it backward until the tension is just below the breaking point. Attach a sharpened stake to the end. Anchor it with a rope tied to a trigger mechanism. Run a tripwire across the path. When the wire is pulled, the trigger releases, and the tree whips forward at 30 to 50 miles per hour, launching that stake horizontally at chest or face height. The Vietnamese called them mace traps. US soldiers called them hell. Medieval Europe had similar designs, spring-loaded spears in castle corridors, siege defenses that used elastic energy to drive sharpened wood or metal into attackers. The physics are straightforward. You're storing elastic potential energy in the bent tree. When the trigger releases, that energy converts to kinetic energy. The stake accelerates. At impact, you're delivering several hundred foot-pounds of force concentrated on a point. That's enough to penetrate ribs, collapse lungs, fracture skulls, sever spinal cords. Casualty statistics for whip traps were lower than punji pits, but the psychological impact was just as devastating. Every low-hanging branch became a potential threat. Every vine crossing the trail could be a tripwire. Patrols moved at a crawl. Soldiers hunched, flinching at movement that turned out to be wind or animals. The traps didn't have to kill. They just had to exist. The knowledge that they might be there was enough to shatter unit cohesion and operational tempo. Engineers had to sweep paths before infantry could advance. That's time. That's manpower. That's the entire point of asymmetric warfare. Use cheap, simple traps to force the enemy to expend vastly more resources countering them. We build one for testing. A bamboo pole, 12 feet long, bent back and secured with rope to a stake driven into the ground. A sharpened bamboo tip, 2 inches in diameter, attached to the pole's end. A tripwire across the path at ankle height, connected to the trigger. When the wire is pulled, the trigger stake is yanked free and the pole snaps forward. We use a ballistic gel torso as the target. The stake strikes at approximately 40 miles per hour. Penetration depth, 8 to 12 inches into the gel. That's past the ribs, into the lungs, potentially into the heart or spine, depending on angle and placement. In a real scenario, this is a lethal or critically disabling wound.
Punctured lung.
Cardiac injury, massive internal bleeding. Even if you survive the initial impact, you're not walking out. You're not fighting. You're a casualty who requires immediate evacuation and surgical intervention, neither of which may be available. The law treats whip traps the same as punji pits, man-trap statutes, booby trap laws, which in some states are separate and specifically cover spring-loaded or explosive devices. Federal laws if deployed on public land or in ways that could harm first responders, which this absolutely could. The same Catco v. Briney precedent applies. Deadly force via trap is never justified, even against burglars, even on private property. The criminal charges are identical. Aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, the civil liability is unlimited. If someone is injured, they sue, they win, they take everything. And you go to prison. The penalties are 5 to 20 years, sometimes more if the injury is severe or the victim dies. Tactically, whip traps have higher lethality than punji pits. They can be aimed at specific approach paths, gates, narrow trails, choke points where you know attackers will funnel. But they're more visible if you know what to look for. A bent sapling that's held under unnatural tension stands out if you're paying attention. And they're single use in terms of location compromise. Once triggers, every attacker knows that area is trapped. They'll sweep it, disarm the rest, or avoid it entirely. And the same moral problem applies. This trap doesn't distinguish between threats and non-threats. If your own people forget it's there, they die. If a refugee stumbles through, they die. You've created a weapon you can't control, and that makes you liable, legally, morally, ethically, for every consequence. Trap 3. The grenade tripwire rational. Modern warfare simplified the trap problem. Why build complex mechanisms when you can just rig explosives to a wire? fragmentation grenades, artillery shells, mortar rounds, landmines, all of it repurposed, all of it lethal, all of it devastatingly effective. World War II saw both Allied and Axis forces booby-trapping everything: abandoned buildings, corpses, supply caches, retreat routes. The Germans were notorious for it. Rig a grenade to a door, rig a mine to a staircase, rig explosives to anything an advancing enemy might touch. The psychological effect was paralyzing. Soldiers stopped trusting anything. Every object became a potential bomb. Engineers had to sweep everything, which meant slow advances, which meant the defenders bought time even as they retreated. Vietnam took it further. The Viet Cong used captured U.S. grenades rigged to tripwires on trails, but they also repurposed unexploded ordnance, UXO, which was everywhere: mortar rounds, artillery shells, bombs that failed to detonate. All of it could be turned into improvised mines or traps with far more explosive power than a standard grenade. A fragmentation grenade has a kill radius of about 15 feet, injury radius of 50 feet from shrapnel and blast overpressure. One grenade on a well-placed tripwire can disable or kill an entire squad if they're bunched together on a narrow trail. And the fuse delay, it's 4 to 5 seconds on most grenades, means the victim has just enough time to realize their mistake, but not enough time to escape the blast radius. That's psychological torture weaponized. The mechanism is simple. Secure a grenade to a tree or stake. Remove the safety pin. Hold the spoon down, the safety lever that, when released, starts the fuse with a thin wire or string attached to a second anchor point. Run a tripwire across the path, connected to that wire. When someone's leg hits the tripwire, it pulls the wire holding the spoon. The spoon flies off. The fuse ignites. 4 seconds later, the grenade detonates. Shrapnel, hundreds or thousands of high-velocity steel fragments, radiates outward at 4,000 feet per second. The blast wave causes overpressure injuries, ruptured eardrums, pulmonary hemorrhage, internal organ damage. Anyone within 15 feet is likely dead. Anyone within 50 feet is likely injured, possibly catastrophically. We don't test this. We can't. Civilian possession of military grenades is a federal felony under the National Firearms Act. Grenades are classified as destructive devices. Possession alone is 10 years in federal prison. If you rig one to a tripwire, you've just committed multiple federal crimes: illegal possession of a destructive device, manufacture of an explosive device, setting a booby trap, and, depending on circumstances, domestic terrorism stuff. The sentencing guidelines are 20 years to life in federal prison. There is no statute of limitations on explosive-related crimes. If you do this and law enforcement ever finds out, even decades later, you will be prosecuted. And the Geneva Conventions, which govern the laws of war, ban indiscriminate explosive traps. The Ottawa Treaty of 1997 specifically bans anti-personnel mines, which tripwire grenades functionally are, even in declared war. Using these traps can be prosecuted as a war crime. Tactically, this is the highest lethality trap we've discussed. It's area denial at its most brutal. Force attackers to avoid entire zones or risk mass casualties. But it's also the most illegal, the most morally indefensible, and the most indiscriminate. You cannot control who triggers it. You cannot turn it off if the situation changes. If a child wanders into the area, they die. If your own people forget where it is, they die. If refugees fleeing violence cross your property, they die. There is no scenario, none, where deploying explosive traps is justified, not in defense of property, not in collapse, not ever. The legal penalties are catastrophic. The moral cost is unforgivable. And if you're caught, you will spend the rest of your life in federal prison, and you will deserve it. Strap 4, the Deadfall. Gravity is patient. It doesn't require ammunition. It doesn't jam. It doesn't run out. You just need weight, height, and a trigger. The Deadfall trap is one of humanity's oldest tools, used by hunter-gatherers worldwide to kill mammoths, bears, large game. The concept is simple. Suspend a heavy object, log, rock, even a weighted net, above a point where the target will pass. When the target triggers the mechanism, the weight drops or swings, and mass times acceleration equals catastrophic blunt force trauma. Military adaptations include Vietnam War-era log traps that swung across trails like battering rams, and medieval siege defenses where stones or boiling oil dropped onto attackers. Modern survival training still teaches deadfall construction for food procurement, though with the explicit warning that designing one for humans is a felony. There are two primary designs. First, the drop deadfall. Suspend a heavy log or rock directly above a trail using rope or cable. Place a trigger mechanism below, pressure plate, tripwire, or collapsing support. When triggered, the weight drops straight down. A 300-pound log falling from 8 feet delivers approximately 2,400 foot-pounds of impact force when it hits. That's calculated from gravitational potential energy conversion. In practice, that's a crushed skull, shattered spine, pulmonary collapse, instant death, or permanent paralysis. Second design, the swing deadfall, also called a log pendulum. Suspend the log from a high anchor point so it swings horizontally across the trail when released. The tripwire trigger allows the log to swing like a medieval battering ram. Same impact force, different vector. Both are lethal. We test this with a crash test dummy positioned on a trail. The log, 300 pounds, oak, 8 feet of suspension height, is released. It drops. The dummy's torso compresses by 6 inches on impact. The head snaps back at an angle incompatible with continued function of the cervical spine. In a real scenario, the victim dies instantly or is paralyzed from the neck down. There's no wounding with a deadfall. It's binary. You're in the way or you're not. If you're in the way, you're dead. Legally, deadfalls exist in a gray area, which makes them more dangerous to deploy, not less. If the trap is clearly positioned for hunting animals, remote wilderness, away from human trails, appropriate size for game, it's legal in most states, though you still need to follow local hunting and trapping regulations. But if it's positioned on a human pathway, near structures, or in any location where a reasonable person might travel, prosecutors will argue intent to harm humans, and it becomes an illegal man-trap. The penalties are identical to other traps: felony assault, criminal negligence, civil liability, 5 to 20 years in prison. The problem is proving intent. If you argue it was for hunting and someone gets killed, you're still facing manslaughter or negligent homicide charges. The victim's family will sue. You will lose. Tactically, deadfalls are effective. They're silent, passive, and can be reset and reused, unlike single-use explosive traps. They're lethal on impact, but they require significant construction effort. Heavy materials, a sturdy frame or anchor point, proper trigger mechanisms. They're visible if poorly camouflaged. The trigger can be spotted and disarmed if attackers are cautious. And they suffer from the same fatal flaw as every other trap on this list: they're indiscriminate. They kill anything that triggers them: your family, your allies, refugees, children, animals, you. If you forget where you put it, if the markers you used are destroyed, if someone else stumbles into the area, the trap doesn't care. It just kills. And you're responsible. Asterisk of 5. Caltrops and spike strips, asterisk 4 nails welded at the center, bent into a tetrahedral shape. Drop it on the ground. One spike always points up, no matter how it lands. That's a caltrop, and it's been disabling armies for 2,000 years. The Romans called them tribuli. They scattered them on battlefields to cripple cavalry, penetrated horse hooves, brought down mounts, threw riders, created chaos. Medieval forces used them to slow infantry, to channel attackers into kill zones, to deny ground. World War II saw metal caltrops scattered on roads to puncture vehicle tires. The Viet Cong made them from sharpened bamboo. Foot spikes hidden in grass that penetrated boot soles caused infections, immobilized soldiers just as effectively as Punji Pits, but with less construction effort. The modern evolution is the spike strip, used by police to stop fleeing vehicles. A strip of hollow steel spikes designed to puncture tires and embed in the rubber, causing controlled deflation. The physics of a caltrop are elegant. The tetrahedral geometry guarantees one spike always faces upward. Drop 1,000 of them across a field and you've created an impassable barrier. Every step risks a puncture wound. For anti-personnel use, each spike penetrates 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches through boot soles into the foot. That's enough to immobilize, enough to cause severe pain, enough to introduce infection risk if the spike is contaminated. For vehicles, modern spike strips use hollow quills that punch through the tire and remain embedded, allowing air to escape slowly enough that the driver doesn't immediately lose control, but fast enough that the vehicle is inoperable within 50 to 200 feet. We test both. For anti-personnel, we scatter homemade caltrops across a section of ground and walk a ballistic gel foot analog through the field. 3 to 5 punctures per step. Penetration depth averages 1 inch. In a real scenario, that's a disabling injury. You're not running. You're barely walking. Infection risk is high. especially if the caltrops are rusted or contaminated. For vehicles, we drive over commercial-grade tire deflation spikes. All four tires puncture. The vehicle rolls forward another 100 feet before it's completely inoperable. Tactical assessment: Caltrops are excellent for mobility denial and channeling attackers into preferred routes where you have defensive advantage. But they're illegal. Anti-personnel caltrops are classified as man-traps in most states. Same laws, same penalties. Aggravated assault, criminal negligence, 5 to 20 years in prison. Vehicle spike strips are legal for law enforcement with proper training and protocols, but illegal for civilian use on public or private roads. Deploying them endangers public safety, causes vehicle crashes, injuries, deaths. If used on interstate highways, you're facing federal charges under terrorism statutes because intentionally causing vehicle crashes on federal infrastructure is classified as an act of terrorism. Simply possessing anti-vehicle spike strips can be prosecuted as possession of burglary tools or intent to commit a felony in some jurisdictions. Tactically, caltrops are effective for area denial and forcing attackers into choke points. They're reusable. You can collect them after an engagement and redeploy. But they're visible, especially vehicle spike strips, which are easy to spot and avoid in daylight. Anti-personnel caltrops are less effective against modern boots with thick soles or reinforced footwear. And they're indiscriminate. They damage your own vehicles if you forget where you place them. They harm your own people. They injure fleeing civilians, children, anyone who happens to be in the area. You've created a hazard you can't fully control, and that makes you criminally liable for every injury. Asterisk, the legal framework. Let's talk about why all of this is illegal, because the reasoning matters. It's not arbitrary. It's not the government trying to disarm you or prevent self-defense. It's based on fundamental legal principles that prioritize human life over property rights. The law has always held that you cannot use deadly force to protect property unless there is an imminent threat to human life. Self-defense, legal self-defense, requires three things. First, an imminent threat. Someone is actively trying to harm you right now. Second, proportional response. You can't shoot someone for stealing your mail. Third, the ability to stop if the threat stops. If the attacker runs away, you can't chase them down and kill them. Traps meet none of these criteria. A trap doesn't assess whether there's an imminent threat. It triggers regardless. A trap doesn't use proportional force. It delivers the same lethal response whether the victim is an armed home invader or a lost child. And a trap can't stop. Once set, it remains a hazard until someone disarms it or it kills someone. That's why courts have ruled consistently for over a century that traps are illegal. The landmark case is Katko vs. Briney, 1971, Iowa. A farmer was sick of people breaking into an abandoned farmhouse on his property to steal antiques. He rigged a shotgun to a tripwire. A burglar entered. The shotgun fired, hit him in the legs, caused severe injuries, but didn't kill him. The burglar sued. The farmer argued self-defense, defense of property, the burglar was trespassing and committing a crime. The court's response was unambiguous. The law has always placed a higher value upon human safety than upon mere rights in property. The farmer was ordered to pay $30,000 in damages equivalent to about $200,000 today. He lost the case. The burglar won. Why? Because even a criminal has a right not to be maimed or killed by a trap when no human is present to assess the threat and make a decision. A similar case, People v. Ceballos, 1974, California. A homeowner rigged a spring gun in his garage to shoot burglars. A teenager broke in. The gun fired. The kid was permanently disabled. The homeowner was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon and sentenced to prison. The court didn't care that the victim was a burglar. The law doesn't allow you to delegate deadly force to a machine. Internationally, the Geneva Conventions ban indiscriminate explosive traps and devices designed to cause unnecessary suffering. Protocol 2, adopted in 1977, specifically addresses landmines and booby traps. Even in declared war, even between uniformed combatants, these weapons are restricted or banned. The Ottawa Treaty of 1997 banned anti-personnel mines outright. 162 other countries signed it. The United States didn't, but most states have parallel domestic laws that criminalize the same devices. The reasoning is the same. These weapons don't distinguish between combatants and civilians. They remain hazardous long after conflicts end. They kill indiscriminately. And in a moral framework that values human life, that's unacceptable. the collapse exception. But here's the counter argument every prepper makes. If society collapses, there's no law to prosecute me. If there are no cops, no courts, no government, then all these laws are irrelevant. I'll do what I have to do to survive. Let's address that. First, most disasters are temporary. Hurricanes, riots, pandemics, even regional conflicts. They end. Government authority returns. Law enforcement resumes operations. Courts reopen. And when they do, if you deployed illegal traps, you will be prosecuted retroactively. The traps are evidence. The injuries are documented. Witnesses exist. You'll be arrested, charged, convicted, and sent to prison. Post-Hurricane Katrina, civilians who used excessive force during the chaos, shootings, beatings, unlawful detentions, were prosecuted years later once order was restored. Post-conflict zones like Bosnia, Rwanda, and others saw war crimes tribunals prosecute individuals for atrocities committed during the conflict, sometimes decades after the fact. The law has a long memory. If you think collapse gives you a free pass, you're wrong. Second, even in total collapse, traps are ethically indefensible. Let's run through some scenarios. Scenario 1, armed marauders attacked your homestead yesterday. You've set Punji Pits around the perimeter. Next morning, you hear screaming. A 6-year-old refugee fleeing the same violence you are has fallen into one of your pits. She's bleeding out while you try to pull her free, but the stakes are barbed and every movement causes more damage. She dies in front of you. Was your defense worth this? Scenario 2, you've rigged a whip trap on the forest path leading to your property. You forget to tell a new member of your group. He goes to check the perimeter. The trap triggers. The stake goes through his chest. He's dead before he hits the ground. How many of your own people will you lose to your own defenses? Scenario 3, you've scattered caltrops across your driveway. A family fleeing violence tries to reach your gate to ask for help. Their vehicle hits the spikes. Tires shred. They're stranded. That night, the attackers find them. Are you okay with that outcome? The Mad Max fallacy is the belief that collapse means total anarchy, that all social structures vanish, that it's every person for themselves in a Hobbesian war of all against all. History doesn't support that. Even in catastrophic collapses, earthquakes, wars, economic failures, communities form. Mutual aid emerges. Informal rules develop. People cooperate because cooperation is the only way to survive long term. If you deploy indiscriminate traps, you're not a protector. You're a threat to community stability. You're the person everyone else has to defend against, and when order is restored, you'll be prosecuted because the community will remember what you did. There are superior alternatives. Active defense, which means defense that involves human judgment. Armed patrols, guard dogs, alarm systems, tripwires that trigger noise, lights, bells, anything that alerts you without harming the intruder until you can assess the threat. Defensive barriers, fences, ditches, berms. These slow attackers give you time to respond, but don't kill indiscriminately. Strategic landscaping, thorny plants like blackberry, hawthorn, bougainvillea. They're painful to cross but not deadly. They create natural barriers, noise-making obstacles, gravel paths, tin cans on wires. They alert you when someone's approaching. Sightlines and lighting. Eliminate concealment for attackers. Make your property visible. Make it look harder to attack than it is. Community defense, strength in numbers, shared watch rotations, mutual aid pacts with neighbors. All of these are legal. All of these allow you to make decisions based on the threat level. All of these let you stop if the threat stops. None of them will send you to prison. The knowledge you hope you never use asks these traps work. That's not in question. Punji Pits, whip traps, tripwire, explosives, deadfalls, caltrops, all of them are proven effective in warfare. They've disabled armies. They've saved defensive positions. They've been force multipliers for weaker forces facing stronger enemies. The Viet Cong used them to fight the most powerful military on the planet and won, in part, because of these simple, brutal, effective tools. But they're also illegal for a reason. They cause indiscriminate harm. They don't stop once deployed. They're moral catastrophes when innocents are harmed. Understanding why they work is historical education. Understanding why they're banned is moral education. Knowledge is not endorsement. If you build these, you're not a survivalist. You're a criminal. If you deploy these, you're not defending your family. You're gambling with innocent lives. And if law and order ever return, and they almost always do, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison for what you thought was survival. The alternative path exists. Invest in legal defenses. Reinforce doors and windows. guard animals, community alliances, firearms training for active, discriminate defense where you assess threats and make decisions, master non-lethal deterrence, noise and light alarms, non-lethal barriers, strategic visibility. Make your location look harder to attack than it actually is. That's effective. That's legal. That's moral. Here's the question I want you to sit with. If you're willing to use traps that cause slow, agonizing death, infected wounds, maiming, crushing injuries, what separates you from the people you're defending against? If you've crossed the line into indiscriminate killing, into weapons that harm without judgment, into systems that can't distinguish between a threat and a child, then what are you defending? What's left of your humanity when the threat is gone and you're standing in a field of corpses? That includes people who were just lost, just scared, just fleeing the same violence you are. The traps we've discussed saved soldiers. They also sent people to prison. The difference is context, legality, and the willingness to accept consequences. In war, under orders, within a legal framework of declared conflict, these tools have a place, however grim. In civilian life, even in collapse, they don't. The cost is too high. The moral weight is too great. The legal consequences are too certain. You have better options. Use them. And if someone tells you they're going to booby trap their property, show them this. Show them the law. Show them the history. Show them what happens when defense becomes atrocity. Because the line is thinner than you think, and once you cross it, you can't go back.